Let's talk about Supabase. This is a backend we can use for our iOS applications if, for example, you didn't want to use Vapor and build your own. Instead, we can use Supabase and it has everything for you. Supabase is a backend that uses Postgres. So it is a Firebase alternative, and Firebase mostly uses NoSQL databases, but Supabase uses Postgres, which is a SQL or relational database. I have a video on my YouTube channel. You can look at that if you want to see some of the basics about backend databases, but also some general information about databases. This one is specifically going to be Supabase. So you can use Supabase in place of Firebase. So if for some reason you don't want to use Firebase, or you find it complicated or any other reason, you can then instead try to use Supabase. Supabase is also an open source alternative, so this means if you don't like how something works, you can literally make an issue and decide to change it yourself, or you can even fork the repository, change whatever you want, and work off of your own fork. So let's learn how to use it. To use Supabase, we are going to make an iOS app that is for feature requests. So if you have an app on the App Store and you want to know what kind of features you need to build next, we can use Supabase to have users enter what features they want from your app. So let's get started. The first thing is we go up to the sign in button and we will sign in. So I have already done that. Once we log in, we can click on new project. So I already made an example, so we're going to make a second one. So you have to choose what your organization is. This is created by default when you create an account. So I just gave mine my name. So let's make an app called Super Features. We need to make a database password, so we can type one in or just create generate password. Once we do that, we can also copy it. After we copy it, go ahead and save that password somewhere on your computer, password manager, somewhere secure, because you'll need it to access your own database. Choose whatever region you would like. I'm going to choose East US. And we are choosing the free plan because I can. But if you want, you can look at the more details and see all the different plans that are available. And then let's go ahead and create a new project. So now we can see Supabase is creating our backend for you. It says it is provisioning the database API endpoints. It may take a couple minutes, but it's also setting up your database for you. So that's why we had to have the password, is because it is a Postgres database, which is a SQL relational database. There's a lot more information about how those work, but for now, just think of it as it's a bunch of tables with rows and columns. So let's get started with the project. So we could do file new project, but actually for this, I've already created a starter project. So to really follow along with this tutorial, download the starter project. So this will be in the description below, the actual URL. But if you go to my GitHub account, which is Michaela Karen, and then go to Super Feature, inside of here, there is a branch for starter. So I'll have two branches. I don't have one set up because I'm not done with it. But right now there's starter, and then the second branch will be final. So you can check out whichever branch. So if you want to see the beginning versus the end. So go ahead and click on code, and I use the GitHub CLI so I can copy this, or here's the HTTPS URL, so just copy that and type git clone. But either way, clone this and then we'll get started. Once you've cloned the project, I've already done this in the starter project, but we can use Swift Package Manager for adding Supabase into our iOS app. So if we go to Supabase Community, and then Supabase Swift is the library for iOS apps, go to this project and it tells you how to install everything and some basic steps. What you can do is first copy this URL. So we will copy that, and then you can add it as a package into your iOS project. If you want to see a video on how to do that, let me know, comment below. Otherwise, add Supabase to your project using Swift Package Manager. I have already done that, so if you download the starter project, you don't even have to. But if you're building your own project, that's what you do. Now that our project is done setting up, let's look around how to use Supabase, basically the web version. So we can start with the table editor or the SQL editor. So if you don't know SQL, I keep saying it, SQL. It is called Structured Query Language. This is basically the language that's used for accessing data in databases. So you can have table editor and then SQL editor here. So table editor, this is where we are going to start because it's the easier one. Here is SQL, which you can write your own queries. If you don't know how to do that, just don't worry about it then. But if you do, this gives you way more control if you would like. So we are going to start with the table editor instead. And this says schema, and there's a bunch of them. Honestly, if you're not familiar with backend, don't really worry about it. Kind of think of it like groups, but I slightly also don't like this word because depending on who you talk to, schema means like 1,000 different things, but kind of just think of it as a group. So if we create a new table, it says new table under public, and public is the schema. So let's create a table called features. If I can type features. And note that this is actually going to be a case sensitive name. So remember that. And this will be feature requests from users. So we are going to use what's called row level security. And this is how you restrict people from accessing data in your database. So for example, user 1 creates a new feature request. User 2 should not be able to delete that feature request. Only user 1 should be able to delete their own request. And we set this up by writing what are called Postgres policies. We will get into that in just a minute. Let's finish up the table itself. So we go in here, and these are the different columns of our table. We have an ID property. This is going to be an int 8, but notice this is a signed 8-byte integer, whereas when we think of an int in Swift, if we wrote int 8 as the data type, that is an 8-bit integer, rather than right here, how Postgres is using it, it's an 8-byte integer. So when we write Swift, we're actually going to just use like a normal int, which that by default is a 64-bit integer, also known as 8 bytes. If you don't know what I'm talking about, also don't worry about it. We're going to use int in Swift, but inside of Supabase, it's actually int 8. This will be our primary key. We will have a created at, and by default, the value will be now, which just means like the date and time as it's created. We are going to create a text property, which this is going to be the text of the feature request itself. This doesn't have a value by default, so the user will have to fill that in. And then we are going to make another column. Actually, we're not going to make another column. We are going to do ID created at and text, and then we'll add the other one in just a second because it has to do with authentication. So we have those three, click save. And now it's creating our table for us. And we see it's pretty simple. We just have 3 rows. We can insert a new row if we wanted to see what that would look like. This is automatically generated, so we don't even have to type anything. This is also automatically generated. So now here, all we have to do is fill in, and this is what the user actually fills in, is some piece of text. So for example, a feature request is, why is it not free? Because that is a feature request. Hit save. And here we go. We see the ID is 1, created at is the current time, and then the text is, why is it not free? So if we insert another thing, we will see this auto increments, this changes, and then we do another one, make it free. Hit save, and then you can see the ID is auto incrementing. So when we delete 2, the next one will still be 3. Now let's set up the authentication. So go to authentication, and first let's go to providers. And so these are the different ways that users can sign up. We are going to use email for this example, but as you can see here, there's a bunch of different ways to sign up. So expand email. We are going to turn off confirm email right now because we're just testing it, so we don't actually want Supabase to go and send emails to like random test emails. We can keep secure change, that's fine for right now. Go ahead, click save. Now let's go to users. And for example, let's make a new user. So this user will be Michaela@tests.com. Password, I'm gonna write password so I remember it. And this is auto confirm, so we are just automatically like creating this user and not sending a confirmation email. So here we go. Now we have a user UID property. So we've set up authentication within Supabase itself. We do still have to write, of course, all of our Swift app, but that is set up. And the last part of this is actually going back to our features table. And we need to add a new column because we have to remember which users created which feature requests. And actually, I also forgot one. So we'll add this new one. First, we're going to add one called is completed, or is complete, because I forgot this at the beginning. So we have is complete. The description would be like whether the feature request was implemented or not. Don't worry about this foreign key, we'll talk about that in just a second. And then data type, this will be a bool because it's only going to be true or false. And the default value is going to be false because of course when they create the request, it's not true by, it is not true by default, meaning it is false. we'll say no to allow nullable. So that means it has to have a value. It has to have either true or false. And then go ahead, hit save on that one. And because we made the default value false, it filled in these ones for us. So let's create one more column. And this one now is going to be called user ID. So this will keep track of which user this belongs to. And then now this is where we want to add what's called a foreign key relationship. So these words, primary key and foreign key, have to do with backend databases and just how they work. You can learn more about the video that's on my channel that I linked above in the card. But otherwise, if you don't know, just look up some like basic SQL tutorial or like backend database tutorial. These words are something you're going to come across. So we'll click add foreign key relationship. So you can look at this, it says what are foreign keys, expand that, but we're not going to right now. So we're not going from the public schema, we'll be in authentication. And inside of authentication is users. So that was the users table we were in a second ago. And this refers to the ID property of that user. Lastly, the action if that row is removed. Cascade is what we're going to use. So this means delete a record from auth.users will also delete any records that reference it in this table. So if we delete, like some user deletes their account, this will also then delete all of their feature requests. So go ahead, hit save. And this was created. So we have these set to null because we don't have anything, but we can also use this ID property. So this ID is the ID for you hold shift and scroll over, my test email that I created. So if we click on that, that fills in. Oh, I double clicked on this null here, and then we just like select the row. And now both of these feature requests belong to the user we just created. Now that we've added the user ID, we can't actually do anything with our database because we have set up this row level security. So to fix this, we need to actually add what are called policies, which basically control who can access what data and who can do what. So we can click on this no active RLS policies, and this will go to the right place, or you can go to authentication on the side here and then click on policies. Let's create a new policy. And we are going to do get started quickly because it gives us almost all the ones we need. We need create, read, update, and delete, and what we want to do with each of those. So for the read policy, let's do this one of enable read access to everyone, because that's true. Everybody can see all of the different feature requests. So let's go create or use this template. Enable read access for all users. That sounds good to me. And then see the selected operation is select. This has to do with because it's a Postgres SQL backend. Select just means get all the data. Default to all public roles, that's fine. And then using expression true, we will keep that, hit review. This is the actual SQL code that executes this policy. And we can kind of, if you're not familiar with it, it kind of doesn't make sense. But again, you can also look at how SQL works and you will see more information about it. But this says create our policy, that's what we're doing. This is the name we gave it. This is the table that the policy is for. So we have one table. So when you do this, you'll have to create different policies for your different tables. This says permissive slick, kind of don't worry about it. It's for the public schema and then just says using is true. So let's go ahead, hit save policy. And that is our read policy. So let's create another one, get started quickly. Here, we want to enable insert access for authenticated users only. That's right, that's exactly what we want to do. So you have to be signed in to create a new feature request. So use this template again. Enable insert for authenticated users only. That sounds good. And now the allowed operation is insert. And again, this is a SQL operation, but insert means put data in the table. And here, the target role is authenticated, meaning you have to be logged in or signed in. Hit review. Again, that's the SQL that is created for this policy. Hit save policy. That one is created. So we have read and we have create. Now let's do the delete policy because we can. So delete, let's use this template again. Delete or enable delete for users based on user ID. So when we're going to be deleting things, every request that we make, we're going to be sending which user it is because that's how authentication basically works. So we know which user is trying to do something. And because of that, we can use that to change privileges. And so what we will do here is use the user ID. We have the delete operation. Delete means delete. It's all roles. And then now the using statement is different. It's auth.uid is equal to user ID. So this is the person that's making this request, whatever their user ID is, check to make sure that the user ID is equal to whatever they're trying to do. And we'll see how that works. But that's what we want. Go ahead, click review. We'll keep all the SQL right here and hit save policy. And now the last one is for enable update access for users based on their email. But notice this says this policy assumes that your table has a column email. Well, ours doesn't. So now we actually need to change some of this. So now let's change the name. Instead of enable update for users based on email, we want to do based on UID, or we can even say user UID. This relates to the update operation. And then here, instead of using this whole thing, we will just type auth.uid, so we get the UID of that user, and then see if it's equal to user ID. And that is the same as the column from the table that we created. And we put the same thing down here with the check statement. And then you've got the little question marks here. You can read what these exactly do more in depth. But again, this is all related to how the database is set up, meaning these concepts are all about like Postgres databases, which Postgres again is a type of SQL or relational database. Let's click review. And now ours says enable update for users based on user ID. And we can see the SQL has changed for what we want. There's extra parentheses, that's fine. So let's go ahead and hit save policy. And there we go. Now we have set up all of our policies so that we have the proper permissions on our table so users can only edit their own things and they can't change things uploaded by other people. Now let's go back to our Swift project. So we've already cloned it from GitHub. The first thing we actually need to do is open this secrets file. So typically you wouldn't commit this file to GitHub, but it makes it kind of confusing with tutorials, so I did. So be sure not to save this to Git again. But what you want to do is we need two values. We need our project URL and our API key. So if we go back into our Supabase project, it will be down in this project settings and then go to API. So we need the project URL and we need the first thing, this anon public key. So just copy this, fill in the project URL, go back here, copy, paste. And there we go. So now when we run this project, it can talk to the Supabase database that we just set up. Now let's look at what this project does. So it's pretty basic. We have just a content view. So if we go over into content view, I did use MVVM kinda for this application. So we have what's called a view model. And then the main content view is just displaying the features. Right here, this is a for each loop for viewModel.features. Features is if we hold option, click on this. This is an array of feature models, and the feature model matches our feature table that we created in Supabase. So if we look at everything, we have our ID. This is optional because we're not actually going to be creating it in Swift. Well, it'll be automatically created by the database. So we make that optional for when we're creating something new. But when we get it from the database, it has an ID. Created at text is complete user ID. Here we have our coding keys, and these are used because in the database that we created, for those column names, they have underscores in them, whereas in Swift, we don't use underscores for variables, so we can use coding keys to change this, to convert them basically. Back in our content view, we have a list of features, a navigation link so you can click on them. It just shows the text of the feature, and then this is just a little pill shape for if that feature is complete or not. So let's go ahead and run this. Now, if we run the app, nothing happens because we haven't written any of the functions that actually fetch information. But if we keep scrolling down, we see swipe actions. So once we do have something, we can swipe to delete. Feature requests, navigation destination. So this is about updating our features or updating your own feature when you tap on this. And in the toolbar, this if statement is basically trying to decide if we're not logged in and we click the plus button, it will ask us to log in. Otherwise, if we are logged in, then it's going to push the add view. And then lastly, we have two task modifiers. The first one is just fetching the initial feature request. And the second one is seeing whether the user is authenticated or not. And that's how we know what happens with this plus button. And then we have the sheet for the authentication. So that is the sheet. And that is the content view. Let's go into showing something before we even add anything, because we already have something in the database. So let's first go over to the viewModel.swift file. So I created this enum called table with features. So when you end up having a lot of tables, this will be useful so you don't have to type features over and over again. This enum auth action is basically to know, are we signing up or signing in right here? And then you can see the words change depending on whichever one you select. We have our view model with is authenticated to know whether or not the user is authenticated, the default action, our array of features, whether or not that auth view, that sheet is showing, and then that email password is for that sheet. So the first thing we do to use Supabase is create this Supabase client, and we can see it is using our secrets file for getting the URL and the API key. We are going to use the Supabase client to actually go and fetch feature requests for us. So let's see how that's done. Here we go. To use the client, we first get the Supabase client. We access its database property because we're getting something from the database. And if you're familiar with SQL, this looks kind of familiar, but if you're not, that's fine. But the structure is kind of like SQL, but it's basically just describing what we're doing. So what we are doing is getting data from the table.features, and this is the enum above here, table.features. So this is the name of our table. And remember that this is case sensitive. So if you capitalize the F in features in Supabase, you need to capitalize it in our code here too. So which table we're getting data from? Select just means get everything. And then we are going to order it by the created date. And then ascending is false. So that means that it'll go newest to oldest. And execute is just say, hey, go do the command. And then value is the actual property that we get back. And lastly, we are setting self.features is equal to features, which is our published property right here. So let's go ahead and run it now. And there we go. We see our two feature requests. So we can swipe to delete. This actually is not doing anything, but the animation itself is working. So if we stop the project, run it again, they're still there. But now we are properly fetching feature requests. So now let's do the next thing of, I was going to say add, but actually we need to do the authentication. We need to sign in and sign out because we can't add new things without being authenticated. So let's do those two first. Let's go and do sign up. To sign up a new user, we have to use the Supabase client, which makes sense. We have to do it for every network call. So let's write that now. Here we go. We have the Supabase client. We are now accessing the authentication rather than accessing the database. And sign up, we're signing up a new user. And this email and password are the variables up here. And these are shown right here. This email and password, that's kind of why I kept everything together, so we wouldn't actually have to pass around data as much. But we can use the email and password. These are connected to those two text fields, so we can use them directly right here. And another thing that would be good, you can do this as a challenge yourself, is check to make sure these are not empty. I'm not going to. I'm telling you to do it, so do as I say, not as I do for this. But then we'll do that, get the email and password directly from here, and then we get back, if you hold Option and see this, we get back an auth response, and this actually has, whoops, let's go to jump to definition. We get the auth response, and we can look at that, jump to definition, and this gives back a session and a user. So the authenticated user that we have, we will get that, and Supabase does everything to save it. So that will sign in a new user, and then, that signs up a new user. Let's also do the sign in. With sign in, it looks almost the exact same. Instead of sign up, now it is sign in. And then again, we are just passing this email and password. And that's all we have to do. We have the email and password, and then we get back what is called a session. Otherwise, if the user can't log in, this function will end up throw an error. Now let's do is user authenticated. We'll do these two as well and then do the whole thing together. So let's do is user authenticated, and we can check this with getting the user from the session. So we are using the client again, using auth. We're grabbing the session and then grabbing the user from that. So we're not actually saving it because Supabase is kind of already doing a lot of that for us, but we do have this variable is authenticated, and this is a Boolean, and we can see that up here. And we use is authenticated in our content view right here with this plus item, toolbar item. It's for us to know if the user's authenticated or not, whether we show them the sign up, sign in, or do we just take them directly to the ad view. So here is where we determine that. Lastly, we have to, almost lastly, sign out first and then authorize. But let's do sign out. And sign out is just a single line. Just write Supabase auth sign out. That's it. We're done. And we should change is authenticated equal to false. This will happen anyways because if we ever ran this function again, it would figure this out for us, but we can put it here also just in case. And then lastly, authorize is the action behind that button. And what we want to do with this authorize function is the action behind this sign up or sign in button. We don't have to have two different functions for this one button. We will pick whether it's sign up or sign in. So this is where we will switch on the auth action. And what's nice is Xcode fills all this in for us. We have sign up or sign in for whichever case. And now we know we can call our own functions try await sign up, or try await sign in. And now when we click this button, it'll properly call the right function. Let's run it now. So if we click Command R, everything kind of looks the same. We will click the plus button and let's sign up a new user. So we made Michaela at test. Let's do Michaela 2, if I could spell my own name right. At test.com. Password is password so I can remember it. Click sign up. And it kind of looks like nothing really happens, but we do get this sign up now here that's shown. So really if this was one tab of your application, something probably would happen and you would see something. But for this, we are just going to change this so we now have a new sign out. So what really happened though is if we click the plus button now we're taken to a different screen rather than previously we were taken to the sign up. So if we go back here, hit sign out, now it's gone. And then also we click the plus and now we have to sign in again or sign up. So let's click sign in because we should probably erase that, but that's already still right there. Hit sign in. And now again, it looks the same, but now we have a sign out button and we know the state changed because we can click the plus and now we have an ad, or we go to the ad screen. So let's go ahead, hit sign out, and we can see all of these errors because this is an async function and this tells you that publishing changes from a background thread is not allowed and you shouldn't do it. So a simple way to fix this real quick is to mark this entire class as at main actor. And I'm not going to go into detail what this does, but that's the way to fix it. And if we ran the app again, now these purple warnings go away. Let's actually go and add new data this time. So let's scroll up to our create request function. And the first thing we do is grab a user. So this is the current user that is logged in. So if you're not logged in, this would throw an error. But also we know that we're never actually going to hit this screen because when you're not logged in, we've handled that. Next is we create our feature. So this feature is created out with a date, the text. By default, it is not complete, so we're setting that to false. And then we are passing our user.id property. The text right here is just an input parameter, so when we actually call that function, and then to actually do something and insert the data into our database, we do supabase.database, and we are inserting the values, and the value is just feature. And it says from because we're saying what table are we inserting data into, and then execute says basically go and actually insert data. So let's go ahead and run this. Let's click on the plus again. So I think I signed out, so let's sign back in. And click sign in. And now when we click the plus, we have feature description. So this add view, I don't think I've shown, but here it is. It's pretty simple. Passing in the view model, here's the text bound to that text field, the dismiss property. We have a form with a text field, and then the toolbar item is that send button, and we are calling the function we just created, or just populated really, called create feature request, and then dismiss. And again, everything is in the sample project that I will have a link in the description below. And that's what I would recommend for this tutorial series. So let's go and type this. So what is a feature request? Make it better. That's a feature. Go ahead, hit send. And there we go. We see make it better as the first thing that shows up. So if we create another one, another feature description, hit send. And now it's back at the top again because we ordered this from newest to oldest, as we can see right here. Okay, only two more. Let's do update and delete. Update will happen when we click on one of these. Now we can edit this, and this now also says update. Let's go down to our update function. Here we go. So what we did was first, this update function is passed a feature and then the text, and the text is the new text we're going to type right here. We first have to double check that the feature has an ID property, because if we hold option click on ID, ID is optional because we don't create one when we're creating something new, but everything else afterwards does have an ID, like when we fetch it from the database. So we have to double check that that is not nil. And then we create a new variable called var to update. So this is the model we're actually updating. First, we are setting it equal to the feature, and then we are changing the text to the text that we're passing in. And now we call the Supabase client again, supabase.database, from what table are we updating? Update is what values are we actually updating. So we are passing in our toUpdate variable. And then this is the most important thing, is the equal to column, because you don't ever want to blindly update something, because if you did this update without the equal, you would end up updating every single row in the database. Ask me how I know why. So you will do that. So what we actually have to do is we have to use this column ID property, and this is, we want the ID property. If we go back to our table here, go to table editor, we want this ID property to match the ID of the one we want to update. So make sure you always have an equal to, or like it's called a where clause, for any kind of update. And then lastly, we are executing it, and this whole thing can throw an error. So what we are just going to do is wrap it in a do catch. So let's go ahead and run this. So if we click on one of these, let's click on make it better. Maybe this person said make it better. Now let's say please. Click on update, and now it's there. So we see update here, and then we also see it changed in our database. But notice, if you remember, we made a policy so that you can only update your own features. So we know this one was my second user. This starts with the E, which is my own user ID for this example. But we know that the first user that we created at the beginning used created one of these two. So if we try to update, why is it not free? If we go ahead, click update, nothing happens. So nothing happens because you can't update that one because it's not yours. So a good exercise would be able to like indicate which ones are your own features, so like you know which ones to actually click on. But otherwise, I don't have proper error handling in this, so that's why it kind of just, it looks like it worked, but in reality it actually didn't. So you could also like add better error handling, but we did guard against it so that it's not possible to do because of the policies we created. So now let's do the last one. Let's delete something. And here we go. It's all the same thing. We are using the Supabase client, so we just have to call it. What we want to do is do try await supabase.database, which table we are deleting from. It's the features table. We are calling delete, and then specifying which one are we deleting. We are deleting where the ID is equal to this ID, and that ID column is this one, and then executing the command. Again, make sure you have equal to for your delete statement as well, because if you don't put this here, it would end up deleting everything. And that's not usually ever what you want. So make sure you always have this equal to, but also this is in SQL, it's called a where clause. So let's run this and hit Command R. So we know we are signed in as user 2 right now. So we know we can delete these top 2 ones. So if we do, can you please make it better? Delete that one. It's gone. We know that we can run the project again because it's still gone. And we see that because it saved it to our backend in Supabase. But now if we go to Supabase, we saw it just refresh real quick. There's only 3 there. There's not the 4th. So we can confirm that it was deleted. Whereas if, again, we try to delete something that's not ours, so we didn't make this first one, user 1 did, it kind of looks like it deletes because we haven't put in any error handling to like make it not do that. But if we go and run the application again, we still have all 3 of them there because it didn't actually delete it because of the policies that we created. We can also change our data in our table and then see the updates in the iOS app. We can change this from false, double click on it, change it to true. Now it's updated, so if we quit the app and open it again, we now see that pill that says complete. And lastly, thank you to Supabase for reaching out to me about this video. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Drop any comments if you have any questions on how to use this, but also because Supabase is an open source framework, you can create your own issues on their repository if you have ideas of different things to contribute as well. And there we go. This is how we integrate Supabase into our iOS app. We add the package using Swift Package Manager, we create the client in some kind of view model class that we have, and then we use that Supabase client for all of our different operations for create, read, update, and delete. We use the web interface for adding authentication, and we create new policies so that we can control what users have access to. So thank you for following this tutorial, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.